The 1992 Los Angeles Uprising, the Cambodian genocide, Japanese American incarceration. What you know isn't always the full story. Our new podcast, Inheriting, about Asian American and Pacific Islander families where the past is personal.
Korean Americans, we call it 사이구.
Did you ever realize when you were a child that you became an orphan?
Camp was such a hard time. How do you think you got through it?
Listen to Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR network, wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And hey everyone, welcome back to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And on this episode of Books and Boba, we are discussing our August 2024 book club pick, Land of Milk and Honey by Pam Zhang, a story that follows an Asian American chef who is stranded in Europe after a global climate disaster as she takes on a new job as a private chef for a private elite research compound in the mountains of Italy, where things aren't exactly what they seem. As always, Books and Boba is supported in part by our listeners over on Patreon. So if you'd like to become a bigger part of our podcast, head on over to booksandboba.com/booksandboba, where our Patreon supporters can gain access to our members-only Discord server, where we hold live discussions of our book club picks and other topics in real time, as well as our monthly bonus podcast, Boba Chats, where Rita and I and sometimes the guests have a more casual chat about a variety of topics, books and otherwise. Thanks to everyone who has supported us so far on Patreon, and I hope to see more of you there. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that for our book club discussions, we will be discussing Land of Milk and Honey in its entirety, including all plot twists and reveals. So this is your final spoiler warning. If you haven't finished the book yet and don't want to be spoiled on these things, go ahead and hit pause on this podcast and come on back after you finish the book to listen to our discussion.
As always, we're going to start with the book jacket description and then dive into our discussion. A smorgasbord. Food crops are rapidly disappearing. A chef escapes her dying career in a dreary city to take a job at a decadent mountaintop colony seemingly free of the world's troubles. There the sky is clear again. Rare ingredients abound. Her enigmatic employer and his visionary daughter have built a lush new life for the global elite, one that reawakens the chef to the pleasures of taste, touch, and her own body. In this atmosphere of hidden wonders and cool, seductive violence, the chef's boundaries undergo a thrilling erosion. Soon she is pushed to the center of a startling attempt to reshape the world far beyond the plate. So I was reading up some interviews with Pam Zhang, and in her interview with The Cut, she said that she started drafting this book back in 2021 during the peak of the pandemic, and she was kind of going through a hard time. And she said that she and her partner, they had rented this, fixer-upper home that was in the outskirts of this really rich community where literally Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos lived. So literally on the foothills of these billionaires' houses that have private everything. So they have private basketball courts, private chefs. And she was talking about how there were no public sidewalks, and it was very lonely for her because she, would want to go out and meet people. But obviously, with the pandemic and also compounding that with she's in a neighborhood filled with rich people who, have private gates, it made it really difficult. And I can kind of see where the idea germinated from in this novel.
Yeah, this book it's a lot of things. It's a lot of themes, right? But the one theme that stuck out the most to me and I think affected the way that I approached the book is this book at its core, in my opinion, is an Asian American story, right? It's about an Asian American, Chinese American refugee in Europe. And much like a lot of stories about immigrants in America, she's just constantly in survival mode and trying to, figure out how to get to the next day as someone who, the people around them think doesn't belong, both because of where she's from and also the way she looks. And so, that perpetual foreignness, which is the core of a lot of Asian American narratives, is always present in this book. And, you know, when I picked the book for our book club, I didn't realize it was going to be a sci-fi dystopia, post-apocalyptic story. So I thought that was really interesting too. And I can definitely see that this book was written during the height of the lockdown, because you do get the sense of isolation, loneliness, and like feeling lost in the wake of like a man-made calamity, right?
Yeah, this book actually reminded me of our past book club picks, like An Ocean of Minutes by Tia Lim, who, you know, it was also like a speculative book that took place during a pandemic, and there's time travel in it, and it talks about like refugees and the people in the top 1% and people who are forced to be laborers. And then also kind of reminded me of Severance by Ling Ma, which also takes place during a pandemic and kind of ties in the Asian American woman experience. So these are very familiar themes, but at the same time, I thought Sipam Zhang brought in something new with all of like the sensory like language and prose that she has.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because I actually read most of this book on audiobook because it's available on Spotify audiobooks, but I also bought the Kindle version and I listened to the audiobook first, so I didn't even realize that this book was written in stream of consciousness until I like started reading halfway through. Like, how did you consume this story?
I used both. So I read along with the audiobook. So I had my Kindle out and I listened to the audiobook at like 1.5 speed. And even at 1.5 speed, it was like pretty slow. And I think that was like on purpose because it's like they want you to kind of savor the really visceral language. And also this is not like even though the book is fairly short, it's not really one of those novels where it's plot driven. So you're like waiting for the next beat in the story to happen. It is very much like stream of consciousness. I mean, time passes with like the seasons because she's there for 1 year, and but like it's very slow, and it can be frustrating for some readers who are like not used to that pace. So I do recommend people to, you know, take breaks, take time in between chapters because the chapters are pretty long too. So I feel like a lot of the complaints that I have heard about this book, because it has like mixed reviews, is that people were like, oh, like nothing happens, the middle of the book sags, and like because it's dystopian, I expected more exploration into like what happened to the planet and the Italian nationalists. Like I wanted more. And it's like, well, that's kind of the point of the book. You want more.
I feel like that's more of a commentary on just the way that like people consume media now and their expectations. I feel like because of the way that media has like coalesced around essentially tropes, right? People have expectations, and when those aren't met, they get upset about it instead of just enjoying the literature as it is. Because like this isn't like you mentioned, this isn't a story about like it's a story surrounding climate catastrophe, but that's setting, right? The story is really about this personal journey of the chef who is kind of disconnected, isolated, just lost in the world, and how she kind of rediscovers what she wants to live for. And I mean, in a sense, a very quintessential coming of age story, right?
Yeah. I mean, she turns 30 during her time at this colony. So it is a coming of age of like, okay, now I'm like technically middle-aged and like, what do I do with my life? I thought it was really interesting that, you know, she had a pretty stable job at like a restaurant. I mean, obviously restaurant culture is not the same as it was before this smog happened. But she is so desperate to have flavors again, to be able to cook with real ingredients again. And this job at this elite research community, which is literally what they advertise the job as, like she I think she says at some point, she's like, I dream of lettuce. And I'm like, lettuce out of all freaking vegetables? Like, that's how desperate she is in order to, I guess, like achieve her dreams as like a chef. Because essentially, like, this is a story about a woman who is very ambitious about her dreams, right? She, gave up med school and, was estranged from her mother, went from California to Europe with like no plans, working under the table jobs just so she can gain experience. And the world pretty much shuts down. And that's kind of like the end of her career path. And it's like, what do you do with all of that ambition? And yeah, I thought that was like really interesting setup.
Yeah, it reminds me of the stories of you hear about people who like are trained doctors and surgeons coming to America and not able to get licensed, so they end up having to work as janitors and orderlies, right? Like, it's a very familiar immigrant story. I thought that was really interesting. Like, yeah, she went to Europe in search of this dream, and then ends up becoming essentially like a refugee because the world shuts down. She can't go home. I want to ask you about just the setting itself, right? Like, it's obviously the thing that caught a lot of readers' attentions because they wanted to learn more. Like, what did you think about the smog, like the smog as the climate disaster?
I thought it was pretty funny as like a Californian reading this, because we're like so used to smog, right? We're so used to wildfires. And I'm like, I can picture this. I can picture this smog.
Yeah.
And also, if you're from Asia, obviously there's bad air quality because of frequent smogs from pollution. So it's like, yeah, I could totally see this happening all across the world and have it freaking destroy our agriculture and our livestock.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really that much of a stretch to me. I think C. Pam said in an interview, I think it was with the New York Public Library, she said that, like, yeah, my book is pretty much like what could happen in like 5 to 10 years. Like, it's not even like that far into the future. It seems very like immediate. And when we think about dystopia, it seems like really out there, and like it's an imagined future, right? But I didn't really have to imagine it. It was very like much not speculative. It was very realistic.
I mean, to be fair, most dystopias, most like dystopic futures take place, like, think of like Blade Runner or like those types of like far future dystopias. They all essentially are predicting late stage capitalism, and as we all know, we are there. We are at late stage
we're
capitalism.
there.
Right?
We're living it right now. Yeah, it's a hellhole.
And the fact that the global calamity is not just the fact that the smog is blocking out the sun, but the cascading effects of that, right? Decimating the world's food supply and calling into question like the precarious nature of our ecosystem. I thought that was really interesting to explore as well. But also, even early on, you see the resilience of like human ingenuity, because to combat the food shortages, they discover like this mung bean food.
It was like a mung bean powder that was like mixed in with other proteins that they were able to extract from remaining food.
As East Asians, I want to say, like, we're very familiar with mung bean powder and mung bean food products. So I was like, that doesn't sound too bad, right? It doesn't sound so out of the
but if that's
ordinary.
the only thing you can eat, it's sad. And like in the book, our narrator says like, yeah, the world turned gray, like just like our food. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds really depressing. And if you're a chef, that's literally the end of the world for you. Because like food and taste, like that's your life. And just to have it be all gray and drained of color and taste, it's really sad.
And like, not to get ahead of ourselves, but that I like that they also brought that back, in which like it's only the end of the world to you if you view the current world with the lens of like things used to be better, or like things like, because like she views the world that way because she was classically trained as like in French techniques as a French chef. And so without the ingredients that she was trained with, like she can't fathom anything, right? And later on we see that, people are resilient and they will find ways to make these humble ingredients something palatable, something new, something unique. But her, as she is currently in the story, and the world as it is right now, right at the beginnings of, or in, I guess, the middle of the, global disaster, can't. And I thought that was a really cool theme too to explore, which is like who gets to decide what is palatable, what is taste, what does it mean to like enjoy food? Like who are the taste
and if you
makers?
think about like world cuisine, it's usually Western food, French food that gets like, it's like, oh yeah, I'll pay $80 for chicken breast, like in some kind of sauce. But if you go to an Asian restaurant and, they give you a chicken dish and it's like, what the freak is this? I'm not going to pay like that much for like mom and pop immigrant food. Like absolutely freaking not. So there is like this internalized colonization happening in the narrator's mind, because she does say to Aida, like, I didn't really have a choice when it came to learning French cooking, because that is the only way I could, kind of climb up as a chef, as a cook, because if I stuck to Asian cooking, then that's all I could be. So French cooking is kind of like the stepping stone to other career opportunities. So I thought that was like an interesting point.
Yeah, and we kind of see that in today's culinary landscape as well, right? Like a lot of the most lauded Asian, not even Asian fusion, but like Asian inspired restaurants, they combine Asian ingredients with like French techniques, right? And we've come a long way since then. Now a lot of these Asian American restaurants, there's more of a point of view, more of a combination of techniques and ingredients, but even so, like a lot of times it still feels like we're stuck in that, like that fusion era where an ethnic cuisine can't become, mainstream unless a white person wills it so, right? Whether it's a critic or like another celebrity chef who finds a way to elevate it.
Yeah. And our narrator applies to this elite research cook job by lying on her resume. And I was just like, yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Like,
it's what everyone else does. Like even today, like
whatever it takes.
I don't know if you've been on like job seeker TikTok, but like
I have.
It's all like another theme that the story hits on like constantly is like being rich, being elite. It's a grift. It's all a grift. Like everyone's lying, everyone's posturing.
And it's not like she can't cook, like she has skills. It's just she didn't graduate from like a super elite French cooking school.
Really quickly, before we get to the compound, I want to touch quickly on this brilliant piece of world building that CPAM added, which is the reason why our narrator is stuck in Europe and can't go back to the States is because the U.S. shut down its borders, even to citizens, and they have a wait list. And you have to be like, they tiered the wait list, right?
Yeah.
So the reason she can't go back is
literally
because,
like immigration. Yeah.
Yeah. For your own citizens. And the reason she's not higher up on the wait list is because like of who she is and what she does.
Well, it's like a little bit more than that, because it's like, one, she's Asian, because they said, oh, if you are of like, what is it? Like a majority minority. And I was like, what the freak is that? Yeah. Are you literally saying that there's too many Asian people in America that they can't accept more Asian people? It's weird. So there's that. And then she has debt because America said, oh yeah, like if your parents had debt, like you inherit that debt. So after her mother passes away from a tragic arson that happens at like the hospice that she works at, she has to pay like all of her
her
parents,
apartment
like,
gets burned down during I assume a race riot or some sort of riot.
Yeah. Was it her mother who was hospitalized, or was it, because I know that her mom worked as like a nurse, because she talks about like wiping people's butt and like pretty much being a servant. So I don't remember what the exact condition her mother was in, but it's like, yeah, she inherited all of her mom's debt. And America is saying, if you have debt, we're put lower on the tier list. We want rich white people to come back to our country.
I think what it was she inherited her mom's apartment after her mom passed away, and the apartment burned down in the riot, and she was on the hook for the damages.
Oh, okay. Well, there you have it. Yeah, it's not fair at all.
Yeah, leave it to America to prioritize creditors over debtors.
But that's pretty much how immigration works, because, like, there's like desirable immigrants, and then refugees in like America's eyes. So it's like, we want like the super educated, super wealthy.
I mean, I wouldn't
immigrants.
put it past them if the whole thing was political too, and it was just racist.
Oh, that too.
Like, I'm sure,
Yeah.
you know, the right wing took over during this lockdown and instituted a bunch of like really racist policies too, right?
Yeah, and also like they closed the border and gave people 24 hours to book their flights to like come back to America. And I'm like, of course, only the rich people are going to be able to book tickets that quickly, or they have private jets and whatnot. So
Yeah, so she gets the job somehow to become the private chef of this elite research colony up in the Italian mountains for an employer who, I guess, speculated this land before the global climate catastrophe and is now one of the only places in the world above the smog where sunlight can still reach and can grow crops. And they're working on some top secret research that we aren't privy to till the end of the book, which when we found out, it's so crazy given what's happening this week. Like, okay, I'm assuming everyone listening to this have already read the book. So the fact that it turns out to be a Mars colonization project,
Yeah.
like, what did you think given like all the SpaceX stuff happening this week? It's like so serendipitous that we're reading this.
I guess. I mean, I always like when I found out that in the book their aim was to colonize Mars, I was like, oh my God, for smart, like a bunch of like rocket scientists and geneticists, like you guys are so dumb. Like, like the amount of research and time and fuel to colonize another planet. Also, like, what are you going to do with like oxygen too? So I'm just like, this is just not possible. I think it's just a lot, it's more plausible to rehab the earth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what CPAM is going for, right? It's just like, yeah, when the chips are down, rich people don't default to let's use our resources to help humanity. Their first instinct is, how do we protect ourselves? How do we escape? Like, their first instinct is just to say, yeah, we're out. Earth is done. We're going to go colonize Mars. And the fact that, like, again, skipping ahead, like the failure of this project is what convinces the rich people to say, hey, how about like maybe it would make more sense if we just put our money into saving the Earth that we live on.
Yeah, there's just too many unknown variables.
It would be more funny if it wasn't so like
tragic
and true to like our current world, right? The fact that we currently have people who, like, I wouldn't be surprised if the end goal of SpaceX would be for Elon Musk to start his own.
That's definitely
like,
the
space,
end.
Right?
Yeah, that's like his end goal, to have like his own kingdom up in space, whether it's like in orbit or like a planet. It's just like, yeah, I'm going to create my own country. And it's like, okay, but even if you were to succeed in that, there are a lot of problems that comes from one person providing all the resources to create this country. It becomes kind of, I don't know, fascist. It becomes a little bit monarchical.
And the fact that like the project is a failure because it was a private venture without any like regulations or safety, like, and the fact that, I don't know if you saw the story that I posted on Discord, but like, the FAA has grounded all future SpaceX like test flights because one of their rockets fell down and blew up like during the landing.
I heard.
Like, it just reminded me of that. It reminded me of like the whole submarine thing that happened. Like, what was it, 2 years ago, a year ago? Like,
well, I mean, there was another billionaire who got lost to the sea. Like, he was sacrificed to Poseidon because his sailing boat like tipped over, I think. But it's also just like, we can't rely on tech to save us, and like we can't rely on billionaires to save the human race. That's just not how it works.
I think it's more you can't rely on billionaires, especially tech billionaires. Like, engineers might and probably will save us because they're the ones doing the experiments, researching, creating solutions to the world's problems, right? They're the ones who will probably discover new efficient ways to have clean energy or to cure diseases. It's the billionaires who think they're engineers, but are really just marketers and business people. They're usually the ones that cause the problems.
Or, they fund these scientific projects, but they're only thinking about their own like selfish goals, like with Aida and her father. It's like Aida is, she's a genius. She's a geneticist. Like, she graduated from she has like her doctoral, like when she was like a teen. But like her father is all about business, all about what can people get for me in order to like have their slot on this paradise that we are building. And it's all about politics. And it's like, okay, but you can't really... It's really dangerous when powerful businessmen take data from engineers and scientists who are trying to, you know, make the world a better place, because it can be turned into a weapon. It can be turned into something catastrophic in their hands.
Yeah. So what did you think about the fact that our narrator and her employer are both unnamed? Actually, all the characters in the story, except for Aida and I guess Kadinsky, are unnamed, right? We only know them by their title.
Also, their ethnicity. They'll be like, oh, yeah, the Iranian meteorologist, the Scottish sheep heiress. And it's like, okay, well, it's kind of stripping down people to, you know, what can they give? What can they offer? And I don't really know why Kandinsky was named, honestly, because you could just replace him with any other billionaire. So I thought that was an interesting choice. Aida, I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. She's the lover. She's like this scientist chick who's like badass, and, you know, like she is the love interest. There's like something fascinating about her. So it makes sense for her to be named. So I don't know, like an interesting choice.
And like, you know, the capital P plot kind of hinges on her, right? Like she is the center of both our narrator's world and her employer's like plans. I did find it interesting also that Kadinsky was named, but you know, he was also kind of a pivotal character, right? He was a character that like his scene, like the chapter where they like, he comes to the compound and they wine and dine him, was a turning point. I guess maybe that's what it is. Like these two characters, Aida and Kadinsky, are major turning points for our narrator, right? Aida is the one that introduces her to like the pleasures of being, if not rich, in the proximity of wealth and the elite. And Kandinsky is the person who reminds her that she doesn't belong here. Like she will never be a part of it. Like she is just there to serve a purpose. Yeah,
I think you're right. Yeah. Also, I guess there's the point of like, you know, even though we may be peasants and are not directly influenced by the inner circles of billionaires, we all know their names. So I don't know. There's that too.
I did like that because the book is written as a like remembrance, right? It's like it's our narrator looking back at her year in the compound. We do get glimpses of the fates of the people that she meets, and the fact that Kandinsky becomes like a washed out has-been investor. I'm sure he's still super rich, but I do like the fact that he loses his clout. I think that was justice, right? Probably not what he deserves, but
yeah. I was surprised that this book was being told from like future narrators' perspective. I don't know, like at first I didn't really like it because in the end I'm like, oh, you survive. I don't know where you are in your life right now, and I doubt that you are in space or like whatever paradise the rich people made, because you are like remembering stuff from this like very pivotal year in your like late 20s, early 30s. But I was just like, it just kind of drained the urgency of the situation for me. But then like when you get to the epilogue and it kind of goes into like what happens after she leaves the compound and how she's, you know, trying to give back to the community, trying to heal the wounds that she had from like, you know, her breakup with Aida, and also like, you know, wounds that she's had from like her childhood with like her contentious relationship with her mother. It's like, okay, like I can see why, you know, this book had to be told from like an elderly narrator's perspective, because otherwise we wouldn't be understanding like the directionlessness of the narrator at that time. Because I feel like, in your 20s, in your 30s, it's kind of like everyone is trying to find the meaning of life. And it's probably a lot harder to do that when the world is, covered in smog.
Yeah, I feel like the book would have been way more, let's say, insufferable if we were in real time in the head of this like directionless person who's kind of being led by the people around her. The fact that it's like a remembrance of like, this was the most important year of my life. And this is like essentially coming of age, right? How I became the person that I am today. I thought that was good. I kind of actually found that the fact that she was looking back, the fact that that something happens to this compound. There's a disaster that happens where like, even in the beginning, right, in the intro, she gets asked a question like, did you know, is that how you survived? Which like pretty much foreshadows that something goes horribly wrong at this compound. And throughout the story, I felt like there was tension, right? Because the compound is facing a ton of opposition, both from the local government, also the environment is changing. They're constantly looking for money. And, we can talk more about how the narrator and Aida plays into that. And so like in my mind, I was thinking, do they get raided? Does something like horrible happen? Like, do they release some sort of zombie virus or like, do the animals like go out of control? Like what horrible thing happens for them to speak about the compound in this way? Again, I did not expect it to be a
Mars colonization
rocket explosion. But I mean, throughout the story, I felt like that was the tension I was building up. Like, how does this go wrong?
Yeah. Before it was revealed that it was a space project, I thought, the nativists take back the land. And I thought it was going to be like, the setting is kind of like Olympus in a way. It's like all the gods are at the top of the mountain and all the mere mortals are at the foot suffering, and the gods are dining on ambrosia and all that stuff. So it's just like, yeah, okay, maybe the humans rise up and take over the mountain. Or if it's like the Tower of Babel, it just like crumbles because of, hubris and like people speaking in different languages and all that stuff. So I was like, oh, maybe it's a metaphor. And then the Mars colonization project showed up and I was like, oh no, this is just like real billionaires being really stupid.
I mean, that's also hubris, right? They did get brought down by their own hubris. Let's talk about, so the first third of the book is our narrator going through her probation period, meeting Aida, kind of getting acclimated to this land of abundance after so long being in scarcity. And then she finally gets the official job offer from her employer, where she finds out that he knew she was lying. He didn't hire her for her skills. He hired her because she's Asian, right?
Yeah.
And as part of her employment contract, she has to pretend to be his wife.
Yeah, that was a twist that I was not expecting, and I expected it to get like more sinister, but I think CPM Zhang like really kind of like reeled it back so it doesn't like turn into, I don't know, like Gone Girl levels of what the hell is happening. But there was like this undercurrent of just like, okay, this is like really sinister because Asian women, like, there's a quote in the book that says, "It has always been easy to disappear as an Asian woman, to be mistaken for Japanese or Korean or Lao women decades older or younger, several shades darker or lighter from my own mother once I hit puberty." So Asian women are essentially like interchangeable to, rich white people. They're hyper visible, hyper sexualized, but also invisible. And I thought it was interesting how, she's put in this really awkward position of like she's being taken advantage of, but at the same time she's like, how do I take advantage of this role that they have given me? And it's really funny how she like pulls she's supposed to pretend to be Korean because the employer's wife was Korean, and she obviously, her being Chinese, like she doesn't know Korean, wrong Asian. So she like pulls random Korean from the K-dramas that she's watching. And it's like a real like funny inside joke between her and Aida until, Kadinsky kind of rips that away from them.
Yeah, there was that scene. Again, a turning point in the story, right? Where Aida and her father are pulling out all the stops to wine and dine Kandinsky, who is this like, a lot of reviewers are referring to the employer as like Elon Musk figure. I think he's more of like maybe a Peter Thiel, right? Like more of a reclusive type of billionaire. Kandinsky is, I think, more in line with like an Elon Musk, where he's, you know, very bombastic, very like wants to be like the alpha male, and very sure of himself and his genius. And then so they finally get him to come in and serve him like a dessert made from the blood of like, what was the blood? It's like some rare animal, right? Like a turtle or something, like a rare turtle.
Oh yeah, it was like a turtle, snapping turtle blood. And you know, Aida comes up with some bullshit, being like, "Oh yeah, in like ancient Korea, the emperor would want to like consume turtle blood for like immortality and whatnot." And I'm like, yeah, this is the BS that we feed white people.
Yeah.
And kind of like make it a joke of our own.
And like, you know, like Aida and our narrator, they get into it in the kitchen, which is kind of weird, right? Because at the current moment, our narrator is essentially her mom, but he ends up with like a hair in his dessert and has a freak out. And our narrator has to prostrate herself and beg for forgiveness in Korean because officially she doesn't know how to speak English. And I actually listened to this part on audiobook. So she's like, the narrator is like spewing out all these random Korean words.
Oh, they were not Korean, by the way.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't even Korean. It was not Chinese. It was just like
gibberish, right?
Chinglish gibberish. Yeah.
But because I was reading along too, in the text, it's just blank.
Yeah. It's like little dashes.
Yeah. I thought that was a really interesting way to express that she's like not saying anything, just like random sounds.
Yeah. I heard from people who didn't listen to the book, listen to the audiobook and just like, purely read visually. They were like, oh, is this like, you know, they redacted the words that they were saying? Or like, is it because because it doesn't just happen when she speaks fake Korean. It also happens when she's listening in on Italian and she doesn't understand what is like what they're saying, except for like maybe one word and it stands out. So I was like, oh, okay. Like maybe like that's like an interesting way to think about it. It's like, oh, maybe like the lines are just, you know, scribbles. Again, pretty much.
Allusions to the Tower of Babel, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a turning point because her apologies, her prostration is not enough. Kandinsky needs to see physical proof that she's sorry. And her employer essentially like beats her down in front of him. Yeah.
It's just like all about control, right? And there's also like that commentary on like violence against Asian women, which we have seen, you know, in the pandemic as well. And yeah, like this is the point where she realizes that Aida was probably, you know, abused by her father. And most likely the wife was also abused by the father. And it kind of like breaks this illusion of, oh, okay, like they don't have everything, even though they're rich, even though they have everything at their fingertips. Like this is a fucked up relationship.
Yeah. And the fact that like everything's a grift, right? Like everything the employer is selling to his investors, to his researchers, even to his daughter, right? It's none of it exists. None of it is true. They're all like built on promises of like future benefits, right? Even the story that he sells to Kandinsky, like it's not true. Like the whole point is to just sell him on a story, show him what he wants to see so he can provide resources to potentially make this thing true. And it's just such a concise way to describe like the tech industry. Like a lot of tech companies, a lot of the biggest tech companies, like they've never really made a profit. They've never broke even on their investments, but they still keep getting money and they still have a high valuation because of the promise of future value that they'll create through their technology. But like a lot of it's just smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. And this book goes into faith quite a bit, like the faith of, you know, believing in these tech scams and also the belief of religion and like the importance of it and, you know, faith that life is going to go on and, you know, the planet is going to heal. A lot of the book is like rooted in this idea of Faith. And Eun-young, the employer's late wife, I guess we're just like, oh, okay, like she's dead, right? She's totally dead.
I mean, it's never confirmed, but I'm not like, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure
she's
this
dead.
type
I'm
of
pretty
man
sure he
will
murdered
not.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the whole reason why he like hires our narrator in the first place, because he wanted someone. He needed a cook because he needed to wine and dine these investors, right? And he's using food as like a way to, woo these investors. And he also needs someone who can kind of pose as like this mother figure for these investors who, have kind of like, they need to be, I don't know, like having someone who can be a mother figure to them gives them like comfort and reassurance that
he needs her
this
to
project
be very demure, very mindful,
very demure,
right?
very modest.
Yeah. He needs her to be the perfect Asian wife.
But also, like, the investors thought that he murdered his wife, and there was no way that they were going to invest in a murderer's project. So
that was a
like,
revelation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was a revelation by the meteorologist who she gives her spot to, which is, we thought he killed his wife. So when you appeared, we were like, oh, which again, also, how can you not tell that they're not? It's like so many layers to just the position of Asian women in society, right?
Yeah, and like she should have asked for more money because clearly the project would not have been successful without her.
And all of a sudden, like the requirements of like your BMI, like he was very controlling of her body too while she was posing as his wife. She needed to be a certain size, a certain shape, a certain diet. That part was just as unsettling as all the science stuff, which, thinking like the true genius of this venture is Aida, right? She is the one who was able to essentially bring the dead back to life, right? Like she brought back the cicada, she brought back these extinct monkeys. And like there's that one scene where she goes to visit her in the lab, and you see like the classifications of like the different animals, right? Like these are animals that are essential to life. And then these are animals they're just here for show. And it just really like aesthetics, tastes, again, pleasure, like what is deemed tasteful is also a big theme, right? Who gets to decide what good taste is? And the fact that our narrator is only allowed like to cook classic recipes. Like her entire repertoire during her stint in the compound is cooking what was considered fine dining in the old world and decadent dining, right? All like the weird shit, like the eating rare animals, or like, here is a classic dish from like Italian or French culinary tradition. And then we see this even in the face of like the world changing, like keeping the old ways is like what's most important to these elites, which is, that's conservatism, right? That's what it is. And that's why a lot of wealthy people are conservatives.
Yeah. And I do love the fact that when she first gets this job, she's like so fascinated by like the rare ingredients, like strawberries. And, she's like, I haven't seen strawberries in like 5 years or whatever. And she tries to eat them, but she like vomits them out because her body has been so used to eating the mung bean flowers. She's so used to just eating just to survive, just for sustenance. And all of this rich food that she's making for these rich folks, like she can't digest it. And then it's only until, she is, when she comes to the mountain, it's spring. And then once it's summer, she starts experiencing pleasure, not just like with food, but also with her relationship with Aida. Like she is able to really like chase down her desire for food and sex. And I have to say, like the sex scenes were written like really like it's not tame, but it's also like not like super graphic in like the pornography sense. Like the prose, I have some quotes down here. Like she says, I look to Aida for the salt. Yes to oysters swollen through butter. Yes to thighs cooled on glass. My hand a hot knife between. So it's like very visceral, but it's also like, is she talking about food or is she talking about sex?
I mean, I feel like they're very similar things, right? Like the way we enjoy
it's
sexual relations and the way we enjoy food. It's all about pleasure. It's all about what brings you pleasure and what causes that. And that was really interesting thing that they explore, especially when after she decides that she's done with the compound and wants to like kind of escape. They take a trip down to was it Venice or Milan?
It was Milan.
Yeah. And she kind of sees how the world has started to move on and adapt, even in spite of like the scarcity. And, this book kind of also explores the difference between eating for pleasure and eating to survive. And like who gets to, define what pleasure is, right? Because there's two instances in this trip. One is like they try to give apples to like these street kids and they reject them, right? And like they don't like the way that the apples taste. And Aida brushes this off as like, well, these kids, their palates have been destroyed by fast food. And the narrator says, I envy the gray sandwich that one of the street kids are eating. Right.
Because it's like a new flavor. It's like part of the new world. And it's like, wow, what a new palate. That's something fascinating.
And that's illustrated also by the jimbing lady that they eat from, who has discovered a way to recreate the traditional Chinese jimbing, which is it's kind of like a crepe sandwich. Using the mung bean flour and like experimenting with different sauces and toppings. And for her to realize that like this is what she's been missing on the mountain, where she's kind of forced to live in this old world and conform to this standard of what pleasure is by people that like don't even relate to her or can't even relate to her. Like,
and I like really, really like that scene with the jimbing lady. And because like Aida's like, wow, this is like actually really good. I want to know like what she used for the filling. Let me like pay her like a shit ton of money to get like the secret recipe. And our narrator is like, no, that's really rude. Like you don't ask chefs or cooks for their recipes. Like that's their life, But this lady, she's like so generous. She's like, yeah, I made the filling from like macadamia butter. I don't know what it was. It was like
I think it was peanut butter or something. Yeah.
Well, the narrator says to her like, "Oh, my mom used to put peanut butter in her jimbing," and like the elderly lady, she just freely gives the filling away, saying, "Come back next time. I'll have like." A better
recipe. Yeah.
And a better recipe. And she has faith in her like ability to create something new and better. And it's like, and to the narrator, it's a revelation, being like, oh my God, I am missing this from my life in the mountains, like you said.
Yeah. Like, I think there's a line, I don't have it written down, but she talks about like, who gets to define pleasure, and once that's defined, like, do you share it or do you protect it, right? And the rich people try to protect their pleasure, hoard their pleasure, whereas like the people, like the common people, the people in community, spreads it because it's meant to be shared.
Yeah, that's what a community is. Whereas like the rich people on the mountain, they call themselves the elite research community, and I'm like, this is not a community. You guys are just a collection of rich individuals who are just there for selfish reasons.
Or you guys are employees and employers, right? Like the people actually doing the work, trying to get ready for this space mission, they're not eating well every day. I don't think, not as well as the rich investors who are like funding it. And I just love the fact that, again, one of the themes is that capital won't save the world. It's community. It's, coming together and adapting. And it reminds me of these concepts I learned back in business school, which is like, businesses, their entire goal is to maximize profit, right? But the way you define that profit changes the way that you operate, right? So there's this concept called net operating profit after taxes, NOPAT, which is like the money, like the total money that your company keeps after paying out its obligations to stakeholders, both private and public. And most companies these days operate under short-term NOPAT, which is how do I maximize our profits now this quarter, because that's how they justify their bonuses. That's how they increase shareholder value, right? Because shareholders only care about how much money they have right now. Whereas like in social value creation, you learn to like a better metric to use is long-term NOPAT, which is how do I maximize our profits over a long period of time, like 10, 20 years? Because in that case, you have to take into account not only current taxes and obligations, but also environmental conditions, like what might affect my profit 10 years from now, what might affect like the social, economical, climate things that will affect it, and how do we account for that in order to maximize our profit. And like that's essentially like the case for capitalism, which is like if you care about your company's growth long term, you will care about the environment, you'll care about social issues, you'll care about the people. Unfortunately, the way that capitalism works in actuality is people don't think about that. They just think about right now. And that is essentially what is the cause of a lot of our issues.
Yeah. And there's this quote that I highlighted in the book. And it's, we all die. We have only the choice, if we are privileged, of whether death comes with a whimper or a bang, of what worlds we taste before we go. And that's absolutely true, you know, in this book, because it's like all the rich people, they get to taste like, you know, all these wonderful food that like no longer exist to like normal people. And, you know, like, if you are in a privileged position, you're not living your life in survival mode. You actually have choices. You have the ability to get angry. I remember there was like a passage about about the narrator noticing that Aida, like she, like her fury, her anger is familiar and nostalgic. But, you know, because the world was kind of going to shit, like she didn't have that privilege to be angry, because like you have to pay rent, you have to stay alive. Like anger is only for the people who actually have the mental capacity for it. So I like the fact that because the narrator, like she is in this mountain with abundance and she's in isolation pretty much. I mean, it's bad and good at the same time, because she has like the isolation and time and space to explore her own pleasures, to actually like, you know, chase down her desires. But at the same time, it's like, you can't just live your life without consequences, you know?
I mean, isn't it just like, it's an allegory to living under capitalism, right? Like she has finally reached a point where she doesn't have to worry about survival. She is in the place where she is being provided like the resources needed, but there are conditions. She has to be a certain way. She has to act a certain way. She has to make certain things. Like she has to do what she's told in order to enjoy all of these benefits. And is that not essentially what we sign up for when we like get a job or live in a capitalist society, right?
Yeah. And it just shows, you know, money doesn't buy everything, you know? Like, yeah. I mean, it gives you security and security gives you happiness, but at the same time, happiness can be found even in scarcity and even in, you know, doing very small things.
Yeah. And, you know, we end up in a world where like this Mars mission ends in catastrophe and all the rich people say, well, since there's no escape, since there's no easy way out, I guess we should think about the long term of this planet and actually reinvest and figure out, because again, like the only way for them to survive now is to make sure the planet survives.
Yeah. And I thought it was really cool that, you know, they go into all of the scientists' labs, right? After the explosion. And they're like, okay, let's see like what they were researching. Maybe we can like figure out a solution for how to save the planet. And they find out that like one of the meteorologists, like he discovered, was it like dandelion? Like it was some kind of like spores that would like clear up the smog. I don't know about the science. I felt really like iffy on that part, but I'm like, whatever, that's not important. But they also found out later that the planet was already like developing these dandelion seeds in the wild, and the earth was pretty much healing without any human interference. So it's like, yeah, you should have just, you know, if they had just stuck around, like the planet would have been okay. And it's like, okay, well, like life does heal. Nature does heal.
Instead, I think their plan B was to like live in like a bunker in Antarctica or something. Like it was like equally like, let's run away and like start our own little like
colony,
right? it also shows just how cynical these people were. Like they were just already convinced that like the planet was doomed, in part because like, and you know, Aida shows this as well as her employer, and I'm sure a lot of the rich people in the compound, which is like they think humans can't help but be bad, and there's no hope for humanity, which is why they need to survive. Which is ironic because essentially their class were the source of a lot of the problems that caused the calamity.
Yeah.
One final note that I really thought was funny was, so the last two chapters are about what happens after our narrator finally leaves the compound, and the fact that like she was able to enjoy like a brief stint as like a restaurateur before a new generation of chefs like entered the industry, bringing with them like the things that they learned while living under scarcity, and like how to like use these like new products, these new ingredients that they found that's completely new, and kind of takes over, essentially cooks her out of her job, and she becomes an investor instead. I thought that was really interesting. The fact that like this like mung bean cuisine has now entered fine dining, and mapping that to the fact that like a lot of like peasant cuisines from a lot of our cultures are now considered like fine dining delicacies at like these like fancy restaurants.
Yeah. I was definitely thinking about like Korean army stew. You know, it was made during war from like leftovers that the American soldiers would just like toss out. And it's like, yeah, that's like something you could eat at restaurants all the time now. It's a comfort staple food.
Yeah, you know, like things like pig's feet and oxtail and all those offalcuts that are like fancy now. And it was interesting to see like the narrator kind of go through the motions, and, you know, her worldview doesn't really change until she becomes a mother, right? And all of a sudden she develops a more longer view of the world too.
Yeah, I think having a daughter who is also like very perceptive and very sensitive and curious, because her daughter ends up being a journalist and also, you know, goes into research on like what happened with the Mars colonization project and the mountain. You know, like she's able to give peace to her mom, and you know, like she's able. The narrator is able to have a mother-daughter relationship that she didn't have with her own mother, and you know, that's kind of like the theme of the book, like the next generation. There's hope, and you know, we can create a better world for the next generation, even if we don't experience the fruits of that labor ourselves within our own lifetime. So this book, despite it being very a bleak setting, it's very hopeful for a dystopian novel.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about, the central theme is this pursuit of pleasure and this pursuit of essentially like your place in the world. And it's not written in a cynical way, and I really appreciated that. I wanted to bring up a comment from one of our listeners that posted on Discord. Nina writes that, I really enjoyed the world that Zhang built in this story. Our society is already starting to get to the point where certain foods are harder to find and are only becoming available to people who have the means to afford it. It's definitely a sobering thought experiment. What really stuck out to me in this book was the different approaches to tackling the diminishing variety of foods. The rich commune decides to grow food and meats, which turns into its own capitalistic endeavor to prioritize the foods that people will pay for the most, versus the lady in the street stall taking the problem as a challenge to figure out how to make something delicious with limited ingredients. The Reddit rabbit holes that I dived into had a lot of people complaining that they wish the author had explored the themes more, but I felt like the concept was novel enough to both entertain and spark thoughts on how close our society is to that in the book.
Yeah, I mean, you can classify this book as like soft sci-fi, I guess. So I mean, it really depends on your familiarity with other genres and tropes. Like, obviously, having certain expectations is you're going to be disappointed that you're not going to get all the explanations for why the world is like this, and also like how everything works with like the smog and whatnot. So it's like, yeah, I can see why people would be a little bit disappointed that the author didn't dive into those details more.
Yeah, but those didn't really bother me as much. I felt like we got enough.
It didn't really bother me.
We got enough background that we know that like something bad's going on. It's a smog that no one really understands. Like they think they know how to happen. It obviously came from America, but you know, at its core, like I said, this is a coming of age story of our narrator, like finding her finding her place in the world, and like that one magical year, that one magical summer where she like it's essentially like a summer camp story, right? Except like drawn out over a year.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
I thought, I mean, like we're running over on our time, but I do want to mention that, CPAM Zhang could have made the relationship with Aida and the narrator like very cliche. Like it could have been an older man in power, like in Aida's position, and then like a younger woman who is directionless and like comes to this job that she's unqualified for. And like I did kind of feel uncomfortable with the age gap because Aida is 20 and our narrator is 29 going on 30 in this magical summer. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, let's not date people who don't have their frontal lobes completely developed, because after they go to Milan and the dog accidentally kills a kid, like Aida's dog accidentally kills a kid, and Aida's like, oh my god, daddy, like please like save me, please clean this up for me. I'm just like, oh, like that's a very young mindset. That
to be fair though, our narrator's also in Arrested Development. I feel like she needed this magical summer to figure her shit out too.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying that like CPAM could have made it like very cliche, but but because she like changed things around, because it's sapphic, because our narrator is actually older, and the person who is in power is younger and also, more educated. Like I thought it was like a really interesting twist. And also like our narrator, like she also dates like a younger woman who kind of like don't remember the smog years. And I'm like, you are like a cradle robber.
Yeah. Is it still a cougar if it's sapphic?
I don't know. But I was just like, girl, like you need to not like, if she was a man, obviously there would be like more, I guess, social acceptance. But for me as a reader, I'm like, man or woman, it's still kind of weird that you are going after people who are like so young and not fully developed. And I do think it's really funny that her second girlfriend after Aida is someone who was like extremely religious. Because if you think about it, like Aida's like obsession with like saving species and whatnot, it's like that's kind of a religion too. This whole mountain project is a cult in a way.
Yeah, definitely. Like our narrator makes no secret how like effed up her love life is, like in general, right? One of the first things we learn about her stint in Paris is like she was like boning her pastry chef, right?
Yeah, don't shit where you work. Also, like, I mean, this is like a short thing, but I love the fact that her mangy cat survives, after like 6 years after she leaves the mountain. And I'm like, good on you, cat. Good on you.
I mean, he's definitely a symbol for something, maybe like the resilience of familial guilt. I don't know, because like the cat is her mom's cat, right?
Yeah, and also just, you never know. Like, you can't just call things off.
Yeah.
Being like, oh, like, the world is ending. There's no hope. This cat is going to die in a year. And it's like, you don't know that.
Yeah.
Have faith.
All right. Well, with that'll do it for our discussion of Land of Milk and Honey by CPAM Zhang. As always, if you have any thoughts you'd like to share about either the book or our discussion of it, please let us know either on Discord if you're a Patreon supporter or on our Goodreads forums. We always love to hear your thoughts about our discussions. But before we go, Rira, what is our book club pick for September 2024?
So for September 2024, our book club pick is A Burning by Megha Majumdar. And it is a political thriller, and it focuses on 3 characters who are entangled in the wake of a terrorism attack in contemporary India. So this is a definite change of pace from the slow and delicious, savory novel that A Land of Milk and Honey is.
Yeah, so looking forward to discussing this book with you all at the end of the month. As always, I will be hosting a read-along on Discord if you're a Patreon supporter, reading about a third of the book each week. So if you'd like to read along with me, please join me over on Discord. But with that, that'll do it for this episode of Books and Boba. Thank you so much for listening to our discussion of Land of Milk and Honey by C.Pam Zhang. And we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey Brian, did you go to Saturday school as a kid?
I sure did. Did you?
Totally.
Well, at our podcast, Saturday School, we don't teach a language, but we pass along the culture that we do know.
And that's Asian American pop culture.
Ada's a journalist, and I'm a professor and film festival programmer.
We've watched a lot of great Asian American movies, and we want you to watch them too. Come listen to us as we look back at the pioneering films that have led us to today.